we'll go ahead and move to the next item on the agenda, which is number 3. Hotel occupancy tax and fee waivers. For some of our new commissioners here, ever since I joined the commission, we have talked a lot about this particular tax called the hot tax. And it's a fee collected from hotels and their occupancy, and it's tourism related. And for many, many years, some folks have proposed ideas. Is there any way that some of this hot tax money could be used to offset public safety costs, because much of that money could be generated during special events like South by Southwest and ACL, et cetera. And so this being the budget situation that we're in, or will be in for a while, we decided to have this up as an agenda item. And so with us today is Ed Van Eenoo, the Deputy Chief Financial Officer of the City of Austin, the man with the keys to the budget kingdom, some would say, but we just invited him here to explain a little bit about what the tax is, what it does, and what it can and cannot fund. So feel free.
And also fee waivers. You also asked me to talk
That's
about
right, fee waivers as well.
I will touch on both of those really quickly. Again, my name is Ed Van Eenoo, Deputy Chief Financial Officer for the city. Just dive right in. You already really teed this up, Commissioner Scruggs, but the hotel occupancy tax is a tax that is placed on room nights, on each night's stay at a motel, hotel, bed and breakfast, or a short-term rental in the city of Austin. These fees are defined within state law, and their uses are restricted by state law. The city of Austin recently approved increasing the city's collection rate from 9 cents to 11 cents, and the state's rate is 6 cents. So for every dollar that's spent on a room night, there are 17 cents of hotel taxes collected, 11 of those staying locally, 6 of them going to the state. Again, within state law, essentially the use of these funds is to promote tourism in the city, to support convention and the convention center and the hotel industry. There's a variety of statutes that define the legal uses for hotel taxes. The first being Texas Tax Code Section 351. This is there's 3 parts to our hotel taxes I'll talk to. Remember I said 11 cents comes to the city. So there's Chapter 351, the 7 cents. There's another component of Chapter 351 taxes that I'll talk about. That's an additional 2 cents. I'll talk about that on the next slide. And then there's a whole other chapter that allows for an additional 2 cents. I'm going to talk about it in 3 pieces. But first, Section 351 allows us to assess 7 pennies, and it limits the use of those 7 pennies to very specific items. And you can see the list of items that really are most relevant to the city of Austin: the construction, operation, and maintenance of the convention center and related facilities, the costs related to basically running conventions, holding conventions in the city, registering convention delegates, advertising and promotional programs that are designed to attract tourists and convention delegates, and then the encouragement, promotion, improvement, and application of the arts. So basically cultural arts. You can have up to 15% of this portion of the hotel taxes can be allocated to cultural arts programs. We do that in the city of Austin. And another 15% of these revenues can go to historic restoration and preservation. And fairly recently, our city council directed staff to start doing that. So for 2 or 3 years now, we've been doing the full allocation of 15% to historic preservation. Just to get right to the chase, to the question we're asked a lot, the hotel taxes, this portion of taxes are limited to those allowable uses, and it's explicit in the statute that they may not be used for general revenue purposes or general governmental operations, such as running libraries, running parks, or pertinent to this commission for public safety expenses.
Will you just be really explicit about this, what you're citing to for that last check mark on page 4?
I can give you. I'd be happy to send you guys the exact statutory language, but that's essentially what it says. These funds may not be used for general revenue purposes or general government operations.
But the EG is someone's interpretation of the statute, right? The
public
EG, public
safety
expenses,
police, fire, emergency medical responses would be general government operations.
Okay, but just the point that I'm trying to make is that the statute itself does not say that hot funds may not be used for public safety expenses. It's that someone at the city legal department has interpreted the statute
That's
to
correct.
not allow public safety expenses.
That's correct. So then there's another subsection of Chapter 351, subsection 1065, that allows certain jurisdictions to assess an additional 2 pennies. The city of Austin is one of the eligible municipalities. On August 8th, 2019, just last month, the city council elected to go ahead and assess that additional 2 pennies. That 2 cents is explicit. It has to be for the expansion of an existing convention center. So essentially, the city council's intent is to start assessing an additional 2 pennies as part of a longer-term planned expansion of the convention center. The final 2 cents comes under Section 334 of the local government code. It allows 2 cents of a hotel tax for what they call a venue project. In the case of the city of Austin, the venue project is the north side expansion of the convention center. That was approved in 1998, and that 2 pennies all goes towards debt service related to that expansion project that occurred. Looking at the revenue projections, so this shows you 5 years of history and 5 years of projections. You can see the big bump up in fiscal year 2020, which is related to that additional 2 cents that the council elected to assess last month. Essentially, from fiscal year 15 to 19, we did the math on that. We've been experiencing 6% annual growth in our total hotel collections. From fiscal year 20 through 24, we are conservatively projecting 3% compound annual growth over the next 5 years. We have started to see a saturation of the hotel market, and so, where we had seen, rapid rises in the hotel room nights and steady growth in the cost of those hotel nights, we have started to see that flatten out, and so that's what we're reflecting in our forecast. Just one last slide on hotel taxes, just to provide a bit of a summary. Now, this is specific to that Chapter 351. I did not include the Chapter 334. Remember that 2 cents of the Chapter 334 hotel taxes is dedicated to the debt service related to the north side expansion. But this is the Chapter 351, which is now 9 cents. 6.5 cents of that goes to the Austin Convention Center. 0.4 of a cent is allocated to the Tourism and Promotion Fund, which comes out to $4.5 million. And then 1.05 cents is allocated both to cultural arts and historic preservation. So the math behind that is the 7 cents allocation, remember that one, and 15% of that can be allocated to historic preservation and the arts. 15% of 7 cents is the 1.05 cents. So those both represent the maximum. It gets a little more complicated than that, though, because over in that blue column, the convention center then, with the convention center's share of the hotel taxes that they receive, 6.5 cents of the total 9 cents, they then subsidize a few other operations. So they provide an additional influx of funding into tourism and promotion. These are funds that go to Visit Austin to promote tourism in the city of Austin. And then there's an additional $3.1 million allocation to both the cultural arts and the historic preservation, which is essentially representative of, if we were able to give 15% of that extra 2 cents the council just approved, this would be the amounts that would be going to those funds. We can't actually allocate it that way because of the restrictions of state law. So the convention center is using other sources of revenue, non-hot revenues, to allocate additional funds to cultural arts and historic preservation. But if you look at the total allocation of our 9-penny Chapter 351 hot, this is how it's being allocated in the fiscal year 2020 budget.
Just a question on, you mentioned these additional funds. Is that on top of the 11.9
Yes, it is.
million?
Yes,
Okay,
so-
it turns out to it's around 15?
Yes.
Okay.
And so we'll be bringing, the council just approved that on August 8th, which was actually after the budget was, the proposed budget was submitted to council. So on September 10th, when staff comes forward with our budget recommendation, we'll also be recommending an amendment to it immediately to reflect the numbers on that slide reflect the additional 2 pennies and the allocation shown on this slide.
I will, I'll leave this up to you. We're also going to talk about fee waivers, which, would you rather have the hot tax conversation quickly now and then go to fee waivers, or would you like to go into fee waivers?
Well, the fee waivers is just one slide, and I think you already have had this in your backup, so maybe I'll just get done talking and then you guys
set
can
it up
just roll.
for us a little bit here in fee waivers, and those are, for example, with South by Southwest or when events come into town, and they request a waiver on public safety costs, various other services that the city agrees to give. And for years, we've had some pretty big fee waivers granted. And so that was another question, another issue we've had tossing around here is, with the budget pressures that we face, why are we granting fee waivers, or can we scale back the fee waivers? So I'll set that up for you.
So you do have a spreadsheet that was provided to you in backup, I believe, of last month's meeting agenda that was carried forward to this agenda. The numbers on the slide before you are maybe $5,000 different than that because it's just 1 month further on, and there was a small handful of fee waivers approved over the last month. So the numbers are slightly different, but hardly at all. On this slide, we present them by the city co-sponsored events. So these are events that the city council has acknowledged as having a community value, and they have actually passed resolutions to call these city co-sponsored events, to support the events through fee waivers. You can see the list before you, but predominantly the largest cost of the fee waivers has to do with South by Southwest, and the largest component of that cost has to do with public safety expenditures. There's also, on any given Thursday, council will waive fees for very small events. It's a long list of events. I didn't provide it for you here, but you can see in total, year to date, it's $44,849 of fee waivers for smaller events that the city council has approved. Under the council rules, each council office is allowed to waive up to $6,000 in fees annually for small events, and so that's what that line item there reflects. You can see over on the right of the combined $2.6 million plus of fees waived so far in 2019. The vast preponderance of those have occurred in public safety departments, nearly $2 million. So that's all I had to talk to you about on fee waivers. There's a little bit more granular information in your backup materials.
Sure. If anyone has any questions, I guess I could ask a few to start, and then I want to make sure that people have their chance here. One thing I just noticed, Austin City Limits, does it get a fee waiver?
They do not.
They do not, okay. The fee waiver offered to South by Southwest, how has that changed over time? Has it grown? Has it been the same amount for several years?
Certainly the size and scope of the event is growing, and so the amount of that fee waiver has grown. Be happy to give you that information. I don't have it off the cuff, but I'm very confident that the number has grown over the last 5 or 6 years.
But typically, are they asking for a percentage of the public safety cost to be covered, or are they asking for the entire public safety cost to be covered as a fee waiver?
Well, this is reflective of the entire amount on the slide here.
Okay. Have we ever discussed removing the fee waivers for for-profit events or scaling them back, especially with the budget process that we have now, if we have the tax cap coming up? People are going to start scrambling for every little bit that they can get. So has that been broached, and where do we stand on that?
It has been broached. I'm trying to think of the last time, but at least on 3 or 4 occasions, different times over the last decade, different councils have had the conversation about fee waivers, and South by Southwest in particular. Ultimately, they've always elected to continue to authorize the fee waivers annually. Our fiscal year 2020 budget reflects that we anticipate that fee will be waived again in fiscal year 2020.
And I'm trying to recall my conversations with APD, et cetera. I believe at one time there were some costs associated with APD and South by Southwest, and that's now been included as a budget line item. Is Chief Gay might be able to remind me on that?
I think it was around in 2016. I believe what the police department used to do is during South by Southwest, they would they would reassign people to work South by Southwest, and they would mandate that people had to work. You couldn't take leave time during South by Southwest in order to mitigate the overtime costs. They would try to cover it with regular shifts and by reassigning people. I think it was in 2016, our city council approved an additional $1.5 million of overtime to the police department budget, so they wouldn't have to do it that way anymore. And so we now staff South by Southwest for police on a voluntary overtime basis to the tune of about $1.5 million annually.
And it's that way in this budget?
Yeah, that $1.5 million has been in every budget since council approved it. Again, I believe it was in 2016.
Has there been any discussion of doing something like that, for example, with fire? I know they have a demand on inspections, and they have an impact on this well, or with EMS. Has that ever been discussed?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I guess I'll go ahead and go to the hot tax real quick, and then we can let others. But on the hot tax, and in this, as Commissioner Weber brought up the interpretation that it could not be spent on public safety, that is not specifically spelled out in state law that this cannot be spent in public safety. That's correct?
I don't believe it is. I'd be
Okay.
happy to send you guys the exact statutory language, but I don't believe it explicitly says thou shalt not spend it on public safety expenses. But it would be, in my opinion, it would be hard to argue that public safety is not a general revenue function. In every city I'm aware of, public safety is what the preponderance of your tax dollars, general revenues go to support.
And how long?
Except-
Oh,
I'm
sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Except that you just told us about a specific line item specific to a tourist event, related to overtime costs. And so the point that I would just make to my colleagues up here is that there is no definitive case that says that the city could not spend hot money on those costs. It's just that there has been some decision made at city legal that, this is the interpretation that we're going to follow, and I'm going to keep beating this drum. I think we should challenge that, and I think that we should find money where we can find money.
And that was my next question in the terms of public safety costs related to a specific tourism-oriented event. One could argue that that's also promoting the event because it's creating a safe atmosphere for the tourists to come into town, so that case could be made. But I understand that these things are out there, and I was just wondering, how long have we been operating under this specific interpretation from legal that it can't be spent on public safety?
I think that's always been the
It's
interpretation.
always been the case.
Yeah.
And there were conversations a few years ago that took place about what to do with the hot tax revenue. And we had a former commissioner who was part of that group, kind of a working group to discuss. And eventually that group went to put the money towards arts funding. And public safety was a topic and was discussed at that time. So it was certainly our impression at the time that public safety might be eligible for some of the tax. But this is the interpretation we're going under now, so I'll let others comment on that. But again, I think this is an issue when, just my personal thought, when we get to fee waivers, for example, that with the budget pressure that we have, we've already, this year we're going to request to raise the tax to the maximum, but next year is when everything hits. Has any discussion been made about possibly leveraging this down a little bit or phasing it out over years? Has that ever been brought up? To phase out the fee waivers, perhaps, if not just eliminate them entirely.
Certainly not this budget cycle, but kind of that same conversation I think you mentioned earlier about South by Southwest. I think the same type of just general conversation about fee waivers in general. Should we continue to waive fees for the events on this list? Some of them, none of them. That conversation has been held in the past, just not recently.
Okay. All right. Anyone else with any questions or comments?
Yeah.
Yes, Commissioner Harris.
Yeah, I just had a question about the 334 money. How long is that allocated to paying off the debt on the previous convention center expansion? And when does the city foresee that money is going to open up for additional operations?
So I believe the original debt issuance, was for 30 years. It has a 2029 maturation date, but I know there's also been some discussion about trying to pay that debt down earlier than that. But I don't have the details on that. We'd have to get the convention center folks to discuss what their plans are in regards to their abilities to defease that debt earlier than the 2029 maturation date.
Okay. And I just wanted to clarify on, I believe, slide 8 about the the additional 2-cent money. So the from ACC column here.
Oh, yeah. There we go. Yes. ACC stands for Austin Convention Center.
Right.
Yep. Not the community college.
Understood. Yeah. Knew that part. So this is assuming the additional 2 cents?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to confirm on
It's
that.
kind of under like what had been 7 pennies up until August 8th was 4.5 cents to the convention center, and everything else was exactly the same. Now the convention center gets 6.5% of the hotel allocation, but then in the blue column, it shows you some of the other functional areas that the convention center is supporting. But again, it's important they're supporting those through non-hotel tax sources of revenue.
Anyone else? Yes. Yes.
So in looking at the 6.5 cents allocation, at the end it says cultural arts and historic preservation.
Yes.
And then down on the 1.05 under historic preservation in general as well. Is that duplicative in any way, or how is that?
They're not duplicative, but they're additive. So think of the chapter 351, those 9 pennies, there's 2 pieces to it. There's the original 7 cents. Of that original 7 cents, up to 15% can go to cultural arts, and up to 15% can go to historic preservation. 15% of 7 cents is the 1.05 that we show on this slide. When council elected to assess the extra 2 pennies, that extra 2 pennies that's allowed under chapter 351.1065, that can only be used for expansion, but there was an interest of, well, we sure would like to find a way to get more money flowing into cultural arts and historic preservation. The solution was to calculate what would be 15% of those additional revenues. The answer is $3.1 million. And now is there a way for us to get $3.1 million more into the cultural arts and historic preservation? The solution was, well, we can't take any more hot money and put it there, but the convention center generates revenues from other sources, from the conventioneers that come to rent the convention center, from the concession sales at the conventions. They generate revenues in other ways, and so they're taking $3.1 million of that revenue, putting it towards cultural arts, another $3.1 million of that revenue, putting it towards historic preservation. And so that's what shows in that last bullet of the 6.5 cents, where it says additional funding for cultural arts and historic preservation. That's kind of the mechanism they use to get more money into those areas, even though state law says it's capped at 15% of the 7 pennies. Does that make sense?
Pretty much.
Okay.
You're incredible, by the way. I can't believe it.
Yes, Commissioner Weber, do you have any
So
more?
I have a motion.
Sure.
But does anyone else have discussion before my motion? Okay, sorry.
So with the numbers that you're calculating in the spreadsheet for expenditures for public safety, are you taking into account the increased cost that we've had due to the types of public safety we're having to provide now for mass events? Like now we're having to use our special units more, and is that cost included in that?
You know, and I don't know if Chief Gay knows. We may have to defer to the financials folks over at the police department. But my understanding of the cost estimates shown on this slide related, not all the South by Southwest is public safety, but the police costs are based upon the overtime rate of officers and lieutenants at specific ranks. And so as those costs go up, it should all be captured. That's part of why those fee waivers go up every year, because the cost of officers go up, and so the overtime cost associated with that goes up.
So it's only the overtime cost, it's not the additional expenses that are associated with that? Do you know, Chief Gay?
It should be, but I do have some folks from special events that could probably answer that a little bit better if y'all want to come up. They're looking at each other. Me?
And if you could just announce who you are and your position, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Curtis Krause. I'm the commander over special events, and I'll introduce Sergeant Mike Jones as well. He's the sergeant there. So to answer your question, there are some specialized units that, depending on the year and the budget, that those monies will go to help pay for. For instance, when we had the bombing suspect, we had to bring an additional EOD, explosive ordnance detail teams. So depending on the nature of the festival and the growth of the festival, the changes in the footprint, different things like that, those things could vary. But those considerations, which tactical units we might need to use, specialized units, then they might be considered for that money. In this case, and I'll let, if you don't mind speaking to which units, I'm not sure specialized units that are going to be covered this year.
Yeah, we use a combination of different units. We like our bomb squad, our EOD squad, SWAT, our special events unit. We hire the majority of the officers throughout the department. So they're from different units, and we'll utilize some of their knowledge and their expertise in part of working the festival.
I think the larger question that we're all interested in is how accurate is the number? Does it actually capture the public safety cost, the extra cost to the citizens of Austin of the South by Southwest Festival? And, how do you ensure that? Do you come back after the festival and kind of recalculate the number?
So we're given a budget to fall within a certain guideline, and from my understanding, it's the 1.5 million that a gentleman was speaking about. So we try at all costs to stay within that budget of 1.5 million.
So it's a tail wagging the dog.
Right.
Yeah. But thank you for.
I do want to just preface is that depending on the threat picture of what's going on, is that whether it's 1.5 or more, we always adequately staff the special events to ensure that we have the right staffing, whether or not it is, and we do recalculate our true cost for South by. Of course, it may be budgeted at 1.5, but each year we do look at our true cost and work with budget on that.
And I would just add, in terms of its accuracy, APD is tracking things down to task order level, how many hours of different ranks were assigned to South by Southwest. If you look at the third page of your backup materials, they have it down to pennies that in FY19, the South by South fee waivers from the police department were $1,514,138.67. So they really are not just guesstimating this stuff. These are actual figures based upon all the tracking that APD does during the actual event, not just a guesstimated amount, but what they actually incurred in the over the extent of the event.
I think these questions, though, in terms of whether the number covers everything, whether the 1.5 million covers everything, because I know from my discussions with you and with others that the massive job it is in today's environment to provide security for an event that basically goes throughout the entire city. Just logic would think, boy, you're going to be really pressed on that 1.5 million every time. And so I think that's a good line to of questioning there. I think I heard another comment. I'll make sure we get into it, but I just have one question. And I may know the answer to this, but have we ever looked at the economic impact of removing the fee waiver from South by Southwest? Like, have they said this will hurt us, or this is going to hurt the festival if we remove this?
I've not been a part of those conversations. Don't want to say that it's not happened between our economic development staff or perhaps council members and the event organizers. It hasn't happened with myself, though.
Okay. And did we have a comment over here?
Yeah, just
Yes.
another question, just to clarify. The 2.2 million here, is that inclusive of the 1.5, or is that on top?
That's
of?
inclusive.
Okay.
The 1.5 is just APD's share, and then fire and EMS would be other portions, and then parks and Austin Transportation would be your other kind of major players in the South by event.
So the fee waiver for South by that goes to APD is entirely to cover overtime because it's all optional work, working South by. Is that a proper, accurate summation of it?
It was, what part of it? I lost you after the optional part. What part was optional?
So the 1.5 million of this 2.2 that goes to APD is all for overtime coverage because working South by is optional for officers.
That's correct. You have that right.
Can I make my motion?
Sure, we'll go ahead in the interest of time here.
So, Commissioners, I move that we recommend that City Council no longer waive fees for for-profit companies, which South by Southwest is a for-profit company. They make money hand over fist. Okay?
I second that.
Thank you. I would include, if the commission agrees, that we recommend that council not phase it out, but rather simply do not pass this fee waiver ever again, including for next March.
I second that.
Thank you.
I think, well, the discussion on the motion, and that's, I brought up the idea of phasing it out in the sense of if you wanted to do that this year, it would be a good time to do that, and then next year, the real budget crunch hits. But then again, if you save the money this year, we get it this year. I know my motivation on this is certainly not that South by Southwest isn't a great addition to the community and doesn't have great cultural significance in the city. It does. It's kind of made the entertainment reputation of the city. And so it has nothing to do with that, and that it's not a valuable part of what we do in the city. This, for me, is primarily almost 100% driven by the state caps that are coming, and how I know that we're already kind of fighting over how to divide the pie next year. We're getting ready for it. We do have needs in our emergency services, in fire and EMS, and not just APD, that even a little bit would help. And $500,000 here might help EMS get a new mobile unit, or these little things which are going to be critical budget discussions starting next year. We've never really had those in the city before. So here is a lot of money, allotment of funds right here that we could say, hey, everyone's doing fine now, the festival's well established, let's look at taking this back. So that's why I'm going to support the motion. But any other discussion?
I just think we also really need to be taking into account that is only covering overtime and the additional cost to our city, because we're putting wear and tear on vehicles. We're putting, there's additional equipment allocations that we need to think about across all three units, and we need to make sure that they're not ending up in a situation where, because of budget crunches, they're not having enough vehicles, or their vehicles are falling apart or are dangerous, or, things like that. And we need to be thinking proactively about the true cost to our city and to our citizens.
And that's one advantage of having this discussion now, because I guarantee you we're going to have the same discussion later, so why not have it now? That's just my thought. So I guess if there's no other comment on the motion, all in favor of the motion? Okay, it is unanimous. So thank you, and we'll get that written up and send to council. Thank you all for coming and giving us a fiscal lesson. Some people may think these numbers are boring, but that's one that the commission was founded on giving council advice on the budget. That was a primary tenet of what we do. So that was a very productive discussion. So thank you all.